So, welcome back to another episode. And this is an episode I feel I really have to make. And the reason why I have to make this video is I've seen these comments throughout my videos here and there where I talk about being in 7-Eleven playing video games, playing arcade games, and comments are left saying there was video games and arcade games in 7-Eleven? Question mark, question mark. People cannot believe it. The younger generation cannot believe that there used to be arcade machines in 7-Eleven. And I can understand that now. I go to all my local 7-Elevens, no arcade machines to see. Nothing there anymore. That doesn't exist. But there was a time back in the 80s, early 90s, where arcade machines were nearly every 7-Eleven. And we're not talking just one, we're talking like 2 or 3, sometimes 4 machines in a 7-Eleven. And I got to experience some of these great games back then that way. That was the way I was introduced to some of them. So yes, they did exist. And they were usually run by mom and pop shops, which they would rent it to 7-Eleven and they would take a percentage. So 7-Eleven would maybe get like 40%, the rest would get 60%. So that's how that kind of worked. But yeah, like it was a really big deal. So me and my friends when we were younger, and I'm going to talk about some games that I saw back in 88 and 89. It was so exciting we would skateboard up, or ride our bikes. But by 88, 89, I was skateboarding all the time. I would go to 7-Eleven and I'd walk in the door and it was a really exciting thing to go to 7-Eleven. Not only was there comic books there was candy and there was arcade games. And there was always a brand new arcade game I've never seen that totally excited me, and I can't wait to talk about some of those today. Like one of the big games on the Genesis was Golden Axe. A side view, action game where it's kind of like in Conan times, medieval times, where you're going around, hacking people up, monsters up, stuff like that, riding monsters as well. It was cool shit at the time. But the first time I ever saw Golden Axe was in 7-Eleven, and I remember me and my friends went in there and were like, oh my god, it's 2-player, and and you can ride monsters in it, like what the fuck, man? And I always remember it being a really big deal. And arcade games back then in 7-Eleven, these were state of the art in video games at the time. I know it's hard to imagine now, but they were state of the art. What you were seeing at 7-Eleven was better than what you had at home on your home consoles. It really was. So when I saw Golden Axe, it was a very big deal. The graphics were so beautiful looking, so cartoony. And this is where, Sega was solidifying themselves with me that these were, this is a great company. That's the first place I saw Golden Axe was in 7-Eleven. Yeah, there were so many times going up and seeing such unusual arcade games. I remember the one time we went up and there was this game called Toki. And I'll never forget it. My friends were all playing these other games in 7-Eleven one day. And there was this game, Toki. And I swear it was only there for like 2 weeks. And you played as this like gorilla, monkey creature. And you're going side view through like medieval prehistoric times. And you can shoot these balls out of your mouth. And you can also get football gear, like headgear and stuff like that. Football helmets, and it was bizarre. I mean, it was fucking bizarre. But if you still look at the graphics here, they still look as good as 3DS games now. Like you could take Toki and bring it to the 3DS and it'd be a great game. And Toki was a very great controlling, fun game. And I spent a couple of dollars on it back then, and I never got to the end of it though. Man, a lot of people, and myself included, would think that Samurai Shodown was one of the very first fighting games where you could use weapons. I still think that it is in my mind, but it isn't. There was a fighting game even before Street Fighter 2 called Hippodrome. And me and Rob talked about it years ago. And it was a side view fighting game where you could you fight in an arena, you fight monsters in an arena, and you gain money and you can buy better equipment, you can buy better weapons, and you fight like Medusas and really like dragons and stuff like that. It was really excellent. And it's kind of bloody as well, which was awesome. This is even pre-Mortal Kombat days. And I think I've talked about it before. I had a friend of mine, at 7-Eleven. He would have a straw, and he push it through the machine and ring up extra credits, and he became really good at Hippodrome, and we all did too. We got a lot better at it over time. But Hippodrome, what a forgotten classic of arcades, and nobody kind of remembers that in the wake of everything. Everybody remembers Street Fighter, Samurai Shodown, but nobody remembers Hippodrome. And I remember going into 7-Eleven late one night. It must have been like, when you're in high school, it's kind of late. It was like 9:30 at night. I was getting some candy, and I looked over, and I'm like, what the fuck is that? And it was this ninja game. And it was a silly ninja game. It was the stupidest ninja game I'd ever seen, but it was better than what I got at home. And it was kind of mysterious and exciting. And it was called Ninja-kun. It was called Ninja Kid over here. I found out years later. But it was just an action platforming game where you shoot shurikens, you're a little super deformed ninja, and you have to defeat all the ninjas in the stage to get to the next stage. And very simplistic, very... not a lot to it. Some of these arcade games back then, there was not a lot to them, but it was very, very cool. And isn't it so funny? That game was only there for like a week, and it was gone. Maybe it didn't make any money. Maybe I was the only person who put 25 cents in. Maybe that's how that worked. And during that same time, I remember seeing another game, Saint Dragon, another forgotten classic arcade game, classic underground cult arcade game, I'd call it. And I first saw it in 7-Eleven as well. Is that it was a side view, shooting game where you played as a robotic dragon in this kind of robotic, mechanized world, like where even the environments were mechanized. It was like this entire mechanized planet. It was kind of imaginative to me at the time. I really liked it, and your body tail could act as your shield to defend against some of the incoming attacks. And yeah, it had some really big boss characters. This giant bull that would come out. It was really cool. And the one thing that I would always do at in 7-Eleven, to do with arcade games, was I'd always put my ear up so you could hear the sound. And it was very hard to hear music in arcades or in 7-Eleven back then. There's all these other fucking sounds, But you get up there and you could hear a bit of it. And Saint Dragon had such excellent music. I remember just being blown away with the music. And I've listened to it recently. And I listened to it about 5 years ago. And I was like, holy shit, this still holds up extremely well. And there was also a PC Engine version of it. It's a bit of a dumbed down version from the arcade, but I was able to pick that up some years ago as well. Another fucking awesome game. Remember I told you about my friend Schneal? His name was Neil, but he was so good at playing Shinobi in the 7-Eleven on the arcade machine that we called him Schneal. Where, can you believe his excitement and my excitement being ninja enthusiasts in the 80s when we saw Ninja Gaiden, the arcade game? Yes, there was an arcade version of Ninja Gaiden that came out roughly around the same time as the home NES games as well. Man, this game blew us fucking away. I always remember the ninja, it said something like Ninja in USA, and he's riding his boat by himself. I think he's got his arms crossed. And that goes to show you how foreign and interesting ninjas were in the 80s. They'd really captured the popular culture so much. And for us back then, playing this game in the arcade, and it's different than the NES games. It's much more like Double Dragon. Much more like Double Dragon, but you can hold on to certain objects and kick off them, but you can crawl across piping and stuff like that. It is different, but it is kind of the same, but much more like Double Dragon, as I say. It was very action-oriented. Sometimes you'd be punching somebody, they'd punch you back, and also there was, I remember in the game as well, there's like a Friday the 13th Jason type of character that you would fight. I always thought that was cool, and that was just showing you popular culture at the time. Ninjas were quite literally invading in America, and America was quite literally invading, Japan in a way, with, like Friday the 13th, and our movies were having an effect on Japan as much as Japan was having an effect on us. It was very, very cool. Now, and one final memory, I've talked about it before, but it's so treasured. Willow is such a bad good movie, I'll call it, but I hadn't seen it in the theater. And I just seen all the TV commercials at the time. When we walked into 7-Eleven, I remember with just a group of us. We all walk in, and I just remember, I just remember seeing Capcom and Willow, you know, the arcade game. And it was like, oh my fucking God. There's an arcade game of Willow, and it's excellent. It's incredibly, the control is so good. The animation was so fantastic. The boss characters were so, you know, everything was so vibrant and excellent with the arcade game. It really, if there was no movie and they just did this Willow arcade game, that would be good enough, because the game on its own was that fantastic. And, you know, obviously the movie didn't do so hot. And the arcade game, just no home forever. It just got forgotten in time. Kind of like Alien vs. Predator, the arcade game that kind of got lost in time. But I still remember it in my mind for sure. So, man, how about you guys? Do you remember arcade games in 7-Eleven? I know there's the odd arcade game in a pizza joint somewhere, or still the odd 7-Eleven somewhere, or a Mac store. Man, they're full of memories and man, full of like such wonderful memories of going to 7-Eleven to buy a fucking chocolate bar and discovering Golden Axe. This is how great times were back then, and it shows the difference between video gaming then and now. You know, now video gaming is all done at home, stuff like that. But back then, you could just go to 7-Eleven and play the state-of-the-art arcade game and have a great time with your friends. And you'd be in 7-Eleven all day. And something else, I'm just going to leave on this. Man, 7-Elevens became the most roughest places because it just attracted the worst scum in the universe like me, you know, and all my friends. And we'd all be in there. I mean, there'd be like 10 of us just in one corner. Could you imagine, like, a bunch of rotten kids just, you know, stinking up 7-Eleven? That was us. You know, nice families coming in and going, oh my God, stay away from those boys playing that Street Fighter and Golden Axe and that Hippodrome. That was us back then, and we had a really great time. And talk about a timepiece, man, that just doesn't exist the same way. And I don't think it'll ever exist that way again, of course. So, anyways, guys, until next time.